Pass your phone to the right. Text the next love goodbye. It's another side girls on. Flowers on the side of the road. Traveling beside each other. No one else to dance.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second episode of Plato and Hollywood, a massively nerdy podcast where we ponder the intersections of philosophy and film. We are your hosts, Naomi Nekrasov
and Gwyn Bakken.
Woohoo! Alright, so last week we discussed basically how modern screenwriting and just modern films has influenced modern novels and literature. So it was a very interesting discussion. And today we are taking a ride into the world of not classic literature, but classic films. So today we'll be discussing what makes a classic movie. Why are certain movies so appealing to a large audience? And why do we see such a huge range of people who all commonly enjoy the same content? And that common content usually ends up being what people would call a classic.
Yes, ma'am. This conversation got started about a little query as to why so many people love The Lord of the Rings for so many different reasons. The main, I think, point that both of us were trying to figure out what the reason for was that someone can love The Lord of the Rings for the costumes or the music or the sound design and think it's just the most perfect piece of cinema, and someone else can love it for its like English mythology roots, and someone else can love it for the romance, and someone else can love it for sword fights, angry rah men rah. And so that's kind of where this conversation came from, was so many people are drawn to this one specific trilogy for tons of different reasons, and a lot of people don't even have the same like ideas in common when they're looking at this film trilogy and going, oh, it's the greatest thing I've ever seen, because someone might be approaching it from a completely different angle as someone else, and yet they're both drawn to it and they both find a special place in their heart for this specific set of movies.
I was even kind of joking and commenting that, like, you know, a lot of the times, like, I'll watch something like Lord of the Rings and I'll be like, oh, this is me at my core. Like, this piece of content just sums me up perfectly.
Literally me.
And then, right, and then it's like I watch Lord of the Rings and I have that reaction, or then I go over and watch, like, Harry Potter, and then I'm like, oh, no, this is literally me. Like, just keep finding Ryan Goslings all over the place.
She sees Timothy Chalamet and she goes, that's literally me.
Maybe? No, he's just hot anyway, so.
Whoa. It's on the record. It's in the podcast.
Oh, no.
You're never going to live that down.
Yeah, I'm not. That's fine. Yeah, anyway, so it's just kind of that effect of, like, finding yourself in so many different things, but then it's like other people are finding themselves in that same thing, but maybe for an entirely different reason. And yeah, it's just very fascinating to me. So you had a good point in our discussion earlier about kind of how sometimes things, like certain movies, will end up becoming classics rather than others because they kind of have, like, they do have that wide range of audience appeal, and it seems like maybe different themes or content will end up being interesting to more people and will stick with them for longer. So what do you think are some examples of the kind of trademarks that go along with these classic movies?
So classic for me probably means classic in, like, the terms of someone who's 20 and under. A classic for me is definitely stuff I grew up on, and not like what you might like look up a top 10 list of classic movies. My classics probably wouldn't show up on there. I'm talking about like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and Star Wars. And I feel like something that I said earlier today that I thought struck me is how so many of these movies that we grew up on don't necessarily look perfect. Like, there's some
Mhm.
grand cinematic shots in each of those that are beautiful to look at and, like, really awe-inspiring to sit in a theater and watch. But there's also, like, some unintentional camera shaking, and there's some, like, poorly delivered lines, and there's going to be one or two moments where things are just on screen to show you what's happening and not necessarily to inspire, like, a spectacle. And I thought it was interesting how so many, like, beloved franchises have those moments of, like, beautiful cinematography and, like, spectacle, but then also those are made more important by just, like, story beats and maybe just 2 or 3 scenes where the only thing that you're trying to do is convey what's going to happen next. And I was contrasting this to the most recent iteration of the Dune novels, where everything is meant to be beautiful. Every single shot, every single line, the acting has to be perfection. And I was talking about how people who are unfamiliar with the source material don't always connect to it as much because it's meant to be a spectacle for someone who already knows that they're into this niche genre. Whereas, like, my mom, who is not familiar with Lord of the Rings, like, source texts, loves the Lord of the Rings anyway because it's still, like, it's meant to tell the story and keep people involved, even sometimes at the expense of, like, being the perfect film. Whereas Dune was, I feel like, heavily trying to be the perfect film, like, sound design wise and visually and on the part of the actors, and in a way they sacrificed some of that audience, like, ability to relate because it was focusing on conveying a very specific type of message and very specific themes to a certain audience that was already heavily invested and looking for something to bring something that they already loved to the big screen.
Right, which I think is because they did have a pretty significant audience base already, was why they probably spent so much time with making all the cinematography and everything pretty much perfect, because, like, the audience kind of already knew what to expect, I guess.
Yeah. I love Dune, by the way. Just throwing that out there.
It's beautiful. Yes. Yeah, but I think to some extent, like, you know, Dune, the 2 Dune movies might seem like, you know, perfection, but some of the audience interest, like, on a larger scale, audience wise, like people who are not interested in, like, sci-fi or fantasy, might not have found the story as compelling just because it is very kind of world building driven and, like, politically driven within the world building. So yeah, in terms of, like, you know, with different classics, like what things kind of draw an audience really strongly into a story, the main thing that I thought of was a little piece of advice from Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which if any of you screenwriters are listening, you probably will have read that book. And Snyder basically talks about how in order for your story to really be compelling, you have to have it driven by a primal sort of conflict. So, like, a type of conflict or need that the main character has that anyone can relate to on the entire face of the planet just because they're a human being. Survival, hunger, life and death, like, your family, you know, wanting to protect your family, wanting to find a family, you know, even if that's more metaphorical, like in, you know, the friendship that the Guardians of the Galaxy find with each other. Just that, like, family instinct. So anything like that, if it's present in the story, no matter how, like, weird and crazy the plot is or the world building is, like, you know, in Dune, it's like everything's just absolutely wacky. No matter how off the wall all that stuff may be, as long as you have that kind of primal instinct that's driving the conflict, then pretty much any audience you have is just automatically going to be locked in to the story. And so that is that's why a lot of these classics sort of emerge. We were kind of comparing and contrasting two movies, The Arrival and Interstellar, and we were kind of talking about how they're sort of in the same genre.
They're basically the same movie.
They're almost the same movie.
They're almost the same movie. Arrival is about the basically first contact with a species of aliens that communicate outside of time and outside of like human perceptions of linguism and grammar. And Interstellar is about astronauts going into space and then dealing with the warping of time that happens when you go through black holes or travel like faster than the speed of light. So both are about humans interacting with time in the context of space and science fiction. But they're from two different directors. One is Denis Villeneuve?
Something like that.
And the other is Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, so, very similar genre, and again, something that, like, they're both, Interstellar and Arrival are both very much, like, in the sci-fi genre, and not everyone is super interested in the sci-fi genre, but I think we were kind of saying that Interstellar has become more of, like, a widespread classic than Arrival has, and I was kind of thinking the reason for that is that Arrival doesn't necessarily have as much of, like, that primal instinctual drive to the story. Because there's a lot of, like, political details and a lot of, like, world building, and there's sort of a survival aspect because, like, the people are afraid of, like, what are these aliens going to do to us, but there's never really, like, an immediate threat.
It's more of a commentary on a certain idea, which is about, like, what language you speak influences how you see the world. So it's more of, like, a commentary than telling a story about an individual fighting a specific thing.
Right. Yeah, whereas, like, with Interstellar, it's like, yeah, it is, going way out there with these, like, fifth dimensional beings and black holes and spaceship and, weird planet, etc., etc. But, like, at the core of the story is, a dad who's just trying to get back home to his kids.
Yeah.
And, so even with all of that, world stuff, and there is social commentary, just like, there is an Arrival, but, like, the reason that you keep watching is because you want to know if he makes it back home.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably why, like, Arrival has definitely become a classic within, like, the sci-fi world, but not necessarily, like, in film overall, because it just doesn't necessarily speak to all humanity as much.
One of the reasons I think that is, like, overall pretty much true is that Interstellar is a very character-driven narrative. Just like Arrival, yes, but Arrival focuses more on, like, an internal conflict, whereas Interstellar has an internal conflict and an external conflict, where you're not only worried about where the character arc is going to go, but you're worried about what's actually going to happen to the character physically and mentally.
And I think what I've learned a lot in screenwriting is just that, like, finding that kind of perfect balance of, like, having your plot and your external conflict, but then, like, having that plot mirror your internal conflict in just, like, a really complementary, perfect sort of way. So, and I think classics typically do have that very strong internal character conflict, even if it's, like, pretty subtle. Like, the first thing that popped into my head was The Godfather, which is, like, one of the biggest classics of all time.
I still have not seen The Godfather.
You need to see it, bro. It's so good. But, there's all this stuff going on with, like, the mafia family, and they're having all this conflict and they're just trying to survive, and obviously it's the mafia. Everyone is in constant danger of dying. But then, on the side of all that, you've got this really just artistically drawn out character journey of Michael Corleone, who's trying to decide, if he's going to be all in, the family business or not. So, it's kind of a negative character arc, but it's still like just watching his internal battle is just a fascinating journey. But like if you didn't have that part and you were just watching a bunch of random mafia guys run around and shoot each other, and then it's like, well, what's the point? Like, what are we doing here?
What was the goal? Why did we come here?
For sure.
So yeah, I think that was a good discussion. Basically, to circle back, it seems like you and I pretty much agree that a classic movie is one where an internal conflict and an external conflict are happening in a way that many different people can relate to, that talks to all walks of lives, and that even if the movie isn't perfect per se, so there are some things that aren't delivered quite right, or it doesn't always look the best in certain areas, the plot and how people connect to it like supersedes all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Heck
well
yeah.
said. Well said.
This has been our class at the Academy for Plato in Hollywood, episode 2.
Hooray.
Hooray.
All right. It's time for the inside scoop. Let's open some ice cream. Hello and welcome back to the inside scoop portion, where we try a delicious new ice cream flavor. Gwen already ate all our ice cream.
Mine is
So,
gone.
I'm a little upset about that.
I
But,
mean, I can review it still. It's gone.
That's fair. All right. So what was your ice cream flavor, Gwen?
Did we have English toffee caramel? English toffee
Yeah.
caramel.
That sounds right. And I tried the Tres Leches flavor,
Yeah.
and I cannot give you the brand name for this ice cream because I forgot.
I didn't know it to begin with. I didn't forget. I just straight up didn't know.
I didn't know it either.
I'll give you the scoop on mine. It was very caramely. It had some crunchy toffee bits and some crunchy chocolate bits. But it was like a vanilla base ice cream. So it was very like soothing, not too much, not too rich. Definitely like the type of thing that you don't want to eat too much of because then it could get to be too rich. But I enjoyed it. It was probably, like last week's treat, a 7 out of 10, I would say.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's pretty fair. What? How would you rate it for aesthetics?
Aesthetics, oh, it was very pretty. Like vanilla with caramel swirled into it and chocolate. Like tri-colored.
Yeah.
Very pretty.
That's the stuff. So my ice cream flavor that I tried was the Tres Leches, which I believe
3 milk.
3 milk, which is
Hola, baby.
yeah, I believe is a Mexican dish, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, it was pretty good. I think it also had caramel in it with a vanilla base, but then it has like the actual cake in the ice cream.
Was it sort of like cheesecake?
Yeah, a little bit. But it's just slightly closer to like cornbread than cheesecake flavor.
Hello?
So, or not flavor, but the texture. So I think the texture threw me off slightly.
Oh, I see.
But
How would you rate
yeah,
it?
it was pretty good.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
I'll give it like a 5.8.
Oh.
I think the texture is a little funky for me.
Next time we're both
yeah.
doing the English toffee, I see.
Probably. But yeah, it's a nice variety because the Tres Leches is a new flavor, so
we're
that's
not defaulting to that.
yeah. Maybe not, but
Maybe not.
I still I appreciate some variety in my life for sure.
All right, this has
Shout
been
out to Dad.
a fun time.
All right, on this portion of Must See or Else, we have a fantastic movie recommendation coming from none other than Gwyneth Paltrow. Take it away.
Hello, hello. As we have decided to use that as an example in the Academy section of the podcast, I have decided to recommend to everyone Arrival, which is by the same director as Dune, the most recent iteration of it. It is about a lady who works for the government as a translator and linguist who is given the task of translating for the first contact between aliens and humans on planet Earth. And the plot twist is that the aliens don't understand time the way that we do, and it begins to affect our protagonist as she begins to learn the language. It is beautiful to look at, beautiful to listen to, and Amy Adams does a really good job in the lead role. Or at least I
and
personally.
Also Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, I personally, it's a personal preference, but I thought it was super good. Highly recommend. All right, and here's Naomi's unrecommendation. She's currently looking through her Letterboxd 1-star reviews to see which is her least favorite to share with you guys right now.
Yeah, I kind of had trouble finding an unrecommendation because I feel like there are whole, like, genres that I don't like.
Oh.
But it's because I haven't, like, really tried them very much. And so I can't, like, explain why I hate things.
She's like a child with broccoli. She just goes, no. No, I don't like it.
Freaking not. Anyways, but something I do have a scathing review for, which I have cited previously as my least favorite movie, is Star Wars The Last Jedi.
That is the most unhot take.
Thank you.
The coldest take.
It is
no one is surprised by this.
The eighth Star Wars episode, the second installment of the sequel trilogy.
Oh, the AC turned off.
And
praise God.
Awesome. Yeah, so basically the reason I hate Star Wars The Last Jedi so much is not because it is the worst movie on the planet, because there were definitely some fun moments, but I think it was the piece of film that destroyed the Star Wars cinematic universe.
I'm gonna ask you to explain that.
Essentially, I mean, one of the big problems is that it did originally have a different director and different screenwriters, and then our least favorite person, Kathleen Kennedy, decided to ruin everything and give the movie a new director, Rian Johnson, as opposed to the director of The Force Awakens, who was J.J. Abrams. So just the wild, like, shift in tone between episodes 7 and 8 was just too much to handle, because the sequel trilogy really only would have had potential if it was consistent all the way through and really brought all of the plot points together in a way that actually made some logical sense.
Somehow.
But
Somehow Palpatine has returned.
Somehow Palpatine has returned. But that's The Rise of Skywalker, and that's a completely different discussion. So yeah. I think, there were a lot of things that had potential from The Force Awakens, like Finn's story, where you have, like a ex-stormtrooper who could actually be of legitimate use to the Resistance, but instead he just kind of becomes a boring side character and has this really strange romance thing going on with another boring side character who, like, immediately dies. And so that was just a very disappointing dead end, because I felt like Finn had potential, and then they kind of just threw his character in the garbage.
I don't think she dies. I think they just shelved her for the Rise of Skywalker. They just she was there, and she just was.
Did
She showed up for like one scene. It was like, I
see,
need
that's
to stay
that's
here.
how bad it is, because it's so forgettable. Like, bro,
They need me here, and then like appears in like maybe 3 other scenes.
there's also just the infamous like Doctor Who-esque tangent where they like save all the space llamas that are like enslaved on that one planet, and
I had
you're
forgotten
like-
about that.
exactly.
I'm living for the space llamas. Why are you saying this?
I mean, they were cute, but it's just like I feel
Why?
like that just hasn't happened in a Star Wars movie where you just go on a complete like random tangent from the storyline just for like, again, the 2 side characters that just ended up being throwaways, and it just makes me really sad. And then also you just have everything of just destroying Luke's character, because he had this amazing character arc in the original trilogy where
Oh,
he
yeah.
became an amazing powerful Jedi, and he overcame his fears, and he, found redemption for his father.
What
And
a good
then-
arc.
I know, it's classic.
Oh yeah.
Like we were talking about in the Academy section, like those movies will never die. They are a classic. And like the sequels, especially The Last Jedi,
We're like,
Which
hey,
is
hey, what
named
if he was evil though?
after Luke, like The Last Jedi is Luke. And they were basically like, well, The Last Jedi actually doesn't care about anything about the Jedi anymore.
He doesn't do jack.
He doesn't do anything. He just is like, oh no, Kylo is scary. I don't want to deal with the world anymore.
Bye.
And that's what he's telling the main character to do. And it's just lame. Like, yeah. So, the only reason why I would recommend The Last Jedi is so that you can make fun of it. And so that maybe you can sign a petition to kick out Kathleen Kennedy as the executive producer of anything Star Wars ever again. Yeah.
Nice.
And I just feel like Star Wars has never fully recovered, except at some random moments.
They jumped back to prequel property, and I understand why they did that, because the offshoots and the series were good. Maybe not the movies themselves, but the series like had some good character arcs and good storylines, and so they were like, we can capitalize on that. Let's forget the sequel trilogy ever happened.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think there's totally a reason why all of the series, the Disney Plus series that have come out, have not been anything to do with the sequel trilogy.
Mad unfortunate.
Which, like, those series have had their own problems, but I think there's been a universal acknowledgement that the sequels had some pretty significant plot holes and just kind of meh vibes.
The vibes are rancid. Anyway, this has been Unrecommendations with Naomi and Gwyn.
Amazing. It is now time for a special commentary on an aesthetic trend of the week brought to you by Gwyn.
Okay. My commentary this week is on the weird chevron, bright pink, teal, chunky necklaces, 0-heeled shoes, no support that our moms wore in 2008. And the stripes and the patterns. I just gotta say, I don't know where that came from. And I just had a weird nostalgia trip the other day where I was like, oh, this chevron looks like something that I would have seen in one of the tiny mother and daughter boutiques in my hometown growing up. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't ever want to see this on another human being again. I was reading a article about 2004 fashion. Yeah, it was 2004. And this article was released in 2005. So it was talking about last year's fashion and what we're not going to repeat with last year's fashion. And one of the things that I noticed was the bedazzled pants. They were talking about the excessive amounts of pocket bedazzlement and pre-stained jeans and all the things. Low rise, high rise. If it's gonna be high rise, it's got all the buttons everywhere. Heavy.
Absolutely.
Jeans that are very heavy to wear. And then shoes with no support. We're talking like Toms. I'm talking specifically Toms. Like everything
So
is a
true.
flat, a ballet flat, a slip-on sneaker, a loafer. And I thought that was just such an interesting...
And Uggs.
And Uggs.
Can't forget that.
Such a specific aesthetic choice. I feel like it reminds me of the 1920s when everything was kind of like shapeless and you were kind of going for this really athletic, boyish figure. And this time around, it seems to be sort of the same way, as you're kind of going for this like almost shapeless figure with these like flat shoes and kind of long shirts with the patterns. However, the patterns are very feminine. So it seems like they're bringing in the femininity using colors and patterns and not with the actual cut of clothing. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you've definitely been describing the mom fashion, but I think what strikes me as funny is that the hipster young people fashion of the 2010s is also kind of equally as cringe, because you've got like the gigantic chunky sweaters and the ripped skinny jeans, and then you've got like the felt hats.
Oh, the felt hats.
Which unfortunately I bought one of those recently, and
You have
for some reason
plenty of
for
them.
some reason I started dressing like 2013 hipster, and it's really bad. But yeah, anyways, it's an interesting compare and contrast.
It's
the
the same
hipster
thing,
fashion and the mom fashion. But like they went hand in hand to some extent for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the mom fashion you're thinking of is almost more like the like French chic thing going on mixed with like beach boho.
Yes.
You know what I'm talking about.
I feel like the beach boho was really popular with like maybe people who were in their 20s and 30s during the 2004 to 2010 period. And then bohemian was equally as popular with younger people, but it was translated differently. So you got tons of things that are really ripped, things that are like loose fitting, things that are like super tight, basically things that do not contour to your body shape at all, but are either like one of the two extremes.
Yeah, totally. Which I think what you said is pretty true, because I feel like it's kind of coming back around.
Oh yeah. I saw someone
just
in
with all the loose fitting stuff,
like a
sure.
tracksuit the other day, like a velvet tracksuit with the low rise pants, and I was like,
no.
How do we feel about this?
Was it the juicy pants?
It was.
Oh
And it
my
was hot
gosh.
pink as well.
That's crazy. Wow.
The
What
girl
an
was
icon.
committed though. I respect her.
What an icon.
I don't remember what her name was, but she was a classmate, and I just called her Shakira because she looked like Shakira.
That's amazing. All right, well, thanks for tuning in for cool stuff.
This has been cool stuff. All right, guys, it's outro time. If you've made it this far, God bless you. That is all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening.
If you are interested in listening to more content like this, let us know, and make sure to subscribe on YouTube and Instagram at Plato in Hollywood. Be on the lookout for this episode on other streaming platforms in the very near future, hopefully. Toodles!
Bonjour.
Bonjour. What? Oh wait, no. This was what was in the script. Until next time, do svidaniya, tavarishi.
Why do you put things
wanted-
that I can't pronounce?
Because it's
Do-
funny.
Svidaniya tovarishi.
Let's go.
You don't have to hide.